Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
This is Ashley Neal, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
If this is your first time here, thanks for checking it out. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry, and this is The Path to Authenticity, episode 227. It features a conversation with a friend and colleague named Ashley Neal, and we get into all kinds of stuff. So, I released an episode yesterday, one the day before. This is the one for today. I'll be releasing another one tomorrow. And all of these I've just kind of been sitting on for a while and wanted to get out before the first of the year. And then I'm going to kind of take a hiatus indefinitely with this podcast. I have another podcast project that I'm working on that I'm pretty excited about. It's going to include video. It's going to be a lot of fun. But in the meantime, I had some pretty good stuff that I just needed to get out, including this conversation, which I really enjoyed. So here you go. I hope you enjoy it too. Ashley Neal.
Emerged from slumber.
You and I met before we worked together,
Yes.
but only a couple times. I don't think we really knew each other.
No.
But man, when this is Turning Point of Tampa,
Yes.
and I was there for a couple years and we worked in the same department. Great bunch of people.
Agreed.
It was a tough time in my life. You know, it's funny because the last couple episodes that came out, the two with Phil Trieber, I talked about this employment experience that I had right before I started working at Turning Point, which was, toxic is not strong enough a word.
Mm-hmm.
It was a guy who owned and ran a facility who had no business doing it. He ended up in prison for a period of time.
Wow.
Narcissist. And I got there, as abusive as you could imagine. And I got there and I lasted a few months. Mostly because I said no to him. Like other people didn't say no to him. And I was like at a point in my life where, I'm not going to let this guy destroy my life. I'm not going to spend every waking hour, trying to make his business profitable. So I got out of there, and I was at the same time in a super difficult relationship. And she had just lost her job, and we were having dinner on my birthday. It was a Saturday night, and I was talking to her about what was going on. I told her I was going to put a resume together, and I needed to get out of there. And I remember her saying to you, he's going to fire you. And I thought, I'd be okay. And I went in first thing Monday morning and I got fired.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was the kind of thing where, I was going to leave anyway. It was no love loss.
Yeah.
But I really came out of it pretty unscathed. But it was a tough period of time and it took me a while. It took me several months to find a job. And I was really grateful to end up at Turning Point. And then that's like the last legit job I've had. When I left Turning Point in 2016, I did a independent contractor thing with a small facility in Boynton Beach and was determined I'm working for myself from here on out. I'm not going to do this again. And then when that ended, I started the podcast a few months later.
Wow.
And since then, you and I had a conversation about you doing a podcast a few months into mine, I think.
So we launched a podcast at Turning Point it was technically launched in September of 2020. But the beginnings of it started around May of 2020.
Okay. So a year later, because I launched this in May of 2019.
Yeah. And I was already listening to podcasts, but I saw on your social media that you were starting one and have been listening to it ever since.
Oh, I appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah, but I contacted you. It was kind of like the stars aligned a little bit because I was very interested in doing a podcast at Turning Point and talking about the issues that people with addiction and mental health face, but I didn't know where to begin as far as a lot of the technical aspects of it. And you were the first person that I thought to call. So you walked the path for me.
My path became your path. And you're definitely not the only person who that's happened with. You're probably the first. But, since another one that I'm sure you know about, my friend Eric Bricker's podcast.
Yeah.
Good Counsel, which I
also listen to.
Yeah. Isn't he great? He's really good at it. And, man, we go back so far. It's made me so happy to see how happy it made him to do this, and also how good he is at it. And it's just one of those things, like until you start doing some stuff with it, you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. And it all just seems so insurmountable, right? I mean, it seems, oh my God, how would I ever do a podcast?
I did have to kind of take it slow a little bit because I'm definitely prone to jump in head first and want everything to be awesome from day one. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of very popular podcasts in several genres. So as we were planning ours, I was taking a page kind of out of all their books, which was a bit ambitious,
Yeah, but you have to have a vision, right? And for me, it was two things. I wanted to have the quality of conversation that Mark Maron has on his podcast, WTF.
Okay.
If you haven't listened to that, check it out.
I will.
He's been sober forever. He's a comedian. He also had a high-profile radio gig for a while. But he's been doing it for like 15 years at this point, and he's really, really good at it.
Okay.
Interviewed Barack Obama during the presidency.
Wow.
You name it. Neil Young, everybody. And he does 2 shows a week. And at first I thought, well, I'll start with 1 show a week, and then I'll do 2 shows a week. I've stuck with 1 show a week. And actually just got off a break after taking a couple months off. The other thing I was concerned about was sound quality.
Yes.
And I know if a sound engineer listened to my podcast, he'd be able to tell what was wrong with it. But I can live with that,
Yeah.
I didn't want it sounding like it was recorded in a tin can.
I think you did a great job for a one-man band.
Yeah, thank you. I mean,
Yeah.
and I started with $130 podcast kit that I got on Amazon, and I ended up having to throw the mic away and get you got to have a decent mic. I mean, that doesn't pick up everything. So yeah, I just, figured it out. And then, then it came to a little bit nicer recording devices and really just doing some stuff to attenuate the sound around me, to try to mitigate anything, the mic from picking stuff up. Anyway, enough about the technical podcast stuff, but tell everybody what you do at Turning Point.
So I really, my relationship with Turning Point got started back in 2006 when I was seeking treatment for myself for an addiction as well as an eating disorder. So I entered treatment here that year. And then after treatment, went out and went back home and worked for a while. And then several years later, I was getting married and my husband was living in Tampa at the time. So I started to look for a new job in Tampa. I had been doing a commute about an hour both ways whenever I was living out of town and commuting to his house on the weekends. And I really didn't want to do that moving forward after we were married. So fortunately, Turning Point was looking for somebody to work in the marketing department. And Joan Brown, she worked here when I was a client in treatment, and she was the person hiring for the position. So the rest is history. This past weekend was 11 years that I have been working here. Yeah. And, I have seen that I am a bit of a unicorn, I would say, just honestly, in being at the same program for this length of time, also being an alumni and being very familiar and being familiar with the area where Turning Point is located. And I appreciate that. What I do at Turning Point is many things, but really how Turning Point is seen in the community is my top priority. My job title is PR and media strategist. So I do a lot of public relations. I do some business development as well and strategy with the vendors that we use for different types of marketing. Really, at several different roles. It's evolved over the years. I've done online advertising. I also created all of our social media campaigns and manage those still to this day. I feel like I'm getting a little bit old to do that. I know that all of the younger people, tend to be in those roles, but I like it. And I always get a lot of compliments about our social media presence. So, yeah. We'll keep doing it.
And you just started another podcast too, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Talk about that.
A girlfriend of mine who is also in recovery, she and I spent a lot of time on the phone, and we realized that we had a lot of opinions about things that we thought maybe other people might be interested in hearing or discussing. So we started a podcast. It's called Broken Minded. We actually aired our first episode on Monday of this week. Our second episode comes out on Thursday, which will be tomorrow.
And is it video?
It is not video. So we have that capability. My husband is the producer. Long story short, my husband started a side business. He is a banker by day, and then in his free time was spending a lot of time using drones to create videos for our family on family vacations, big family trips. We have a big family up in Georgia and a couple other states, but essentially nobody is in Florida except for my side of the family. So he's been working with drones for several years and started editing the video and realized how much he liked it and said, I really think I want to monetize this. So he started a business doing drone photography, drone videography, as well as just still photography. And he is the sound engineer / producer for the Broken Minded podcast. So he has the ability to video it. Allie and I are just not to the place where we're comfortable doing video yet. I do watch some video podcasts. I don't know how much editing is happening with those. I think it might be kind of hard to match it up quite a bit. I was very pleasantly surprised at how well of a job my husband did editing our first 2 episodes. And I just don't know how that would translate with the video as well. So for now, we're going to stick with audio.
Yeah. I mean, I self-taught sound audio editor. I just, and what I've learned with that is the better I become at it, the more I know to do, the longer it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And our podcast, Broken Minded podcast, is, it will have a variety of topics. Our first full-length episode that airs tomorrow is just something kind of cheeky. It is a long had debate between Allie and I, the other co-host, on which is better, Cracker Barrel or Waffle House. So we did some extensive research and we'll be airing that episode tomorrow. It was a very fun episode.
Well, it's not exactly comparing apples to apples.
Yeah. Well, you'll just have to listen.
At this point in my life, I'd vote Waffle House. I wish there was a Waffle House in my town. It's funny because the last time I was in Florida, I drove down there with my wife just before we got married, actually. And we stopped at most of the Buc-ee's that we saw. Yeah. And that's where we got gas and Buc-ee's beaver nuggets. If you don't know what those are, you got to try them. And definitely if you have a sweet tooth. And I ate at Waffle House every chance I got.
Wow.
Until we almost got back. I went to one outside Asheville, North Carolina for dinner. And it was the only one I'd been to through this ever, really, where it was all teenagers running it. And I got my bacon and it was like, oh man, way overcooked, which I like it a little soft. So they took it back and then it took forever for it to come back and it came back and then it was undercooked.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought, this will be fine. This doesn't look fine, but I'll just go with it because it was actually like not a healthier moment, my codependency came out a little bit. And I ate about half of it and man, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was not good, And so I decided maybe half dozen times at Waffle House over the course of about 5 days is probably plenty for a while, right?
Well, I learned from the research that Allie did that Waffle House is in only about 25 states in the United States. And as you move up north in the country, they start to disappear. But you're considered in the Midwest, right?
Right. The nearest one is about an hour south of me.
Yeah, that's what she said. There are some in the Midwest. Definitely the most of them are in the South. But further north you go, the less you will run into them. And Cracker Barrel actually fares a bit better that there are only 5 states that don't have a Cracker Barrel.
Yeah, well, the town where I live now, Kokomo, Indiana, I believe at one point this was true, has the only Cracker Barrel that's not on an interstate.
Interesting.
It's on a federal highway, but it's not on an interstate. And yeah, I mean, this town has long been known to have all the fast food and, lots of stuff like that. Anyway, I mean, you really can't go wrong at Waffle House.
Well, I mean, I would beg to differ, but
I mean, they don't have the menu that Cracker Barrel has,
no.
but
And if you're craving a vegetable, all you're going to find is an onion or a tomato at Waffle House. So,
what, they don't have green beans or anything like that?
no.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Of course, I never was. It was always about, well, the hash browns and all that
Yes.
stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's got to be fun, right?
It is fun. She's one of my very good friends, and it's very fun to also come up with the topics. And we have been getting some feedback from people on, what they might like to hear. We got a lot of feedback on this episode. I did a little preview on social media about it. We had a little healthy debate going on, but some of the topics that are important to us that have been important in our lives, we'll be talking about. Yeah.
Well, you and I had a chance to catch up last week with our mutual friend and colleague, Ed Tilton.
Yes.
Who really is just one of my most favorite people in the world.
I can see why.
And we talked about maybe you taking part in this Men Who Talk thing a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That has been really cool. It's been more topical than obviously this format, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And we did it all here on Clubhouse, where you and I are recording now. And I started to take a run at a second season, and I just had a feeling, Ed's a busy guy. There's another guy, Ezra, who I've had come, but he's got other stuff going on too. And I really felt like I just needed more people. And so I've talked to a couple other people, but I'm excited about getting going with that and kicking around some ideas about what would be good to talk about as it pertains to manhood, men and intimacy, men in relationships. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, wow. Put me on the spot a little bit.
Yeah, why not?
Well, it's interesting. I did talk to my husband about it, and I felt like it was a great idea. And, something that my husband said was he feels a bit like maybe over the past couple of years that he's pulled back a little bit, where he doesn't necessarily feel like he really has a space where he can be authentic.
With other guys, do you mean?
No, just like publicly. Feels like more of a little bit of the time of the woman. And I think that makes him a little bit uncomfortable. And, being a woman who's married to a man, I can see how that has affected him. So I, am definitely for women's empowerment, but I'm also for men's empowerment. I think we're all important. And I want men to have a space where they feel like they can be honest and be open. And I would like to participate in those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I mean, I think intimacy, of course, I don't think we can have this conversation without addressing intimacy.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's, connection. And to me, it begins with connection to self.
Yeah.
Always. Because if I can't be connected to myself, I can't really be connected to you.
Yeah. And you said something in our conversation about being grounded. And it was so funny that you said that, because I had literally used those words in a conversation with my husband a couple days prior when we were talking about, the things that he and I have both done over the past couple of years to get grounded. Mm-hmm. And, as we get older, things change and priorities change. And you do start to look at some things a little differently. And being grounded in a time when things seem so hectic is very important.
Yeah. And it's funny. One of the things I've been thinking about, I've talked touched on this with someone else earlier today too, this whole idea of being grounded in who you are. And if you are, then, you know, the outside relationships work a lot better. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But this, you have noticed, I'm sure, that over the last couple of years, I've done some of these journaling challenges where I send out a prompt every day for a month. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about doing something with that, and am going to. And I wanted to do it a little bit differently and have it be maybe more focused with an agenda to get you somewhere at the end of the month or the end of the period of time, however long it is. And I think what I want to do it on is, who am I? Because I'm sure you've experienced this when somebody historically has asked me, who are you? Or when we ask someone, who are you? Most people immediately respond with what they do for a living, if they're a parent, how many kids they have, who they're married to, where they went to college, all this kind of stuff that really has nothing to do with who I am as a human being.
Right. I would agree.
It came up for me the last time. I mean, I've been sober a long time. I've worked on myself a lot.
Right.
So to be 20 plus years and sitting in a therapist's office and have her look at me and say, who are you, Tom? Like, and I brought this up when she's like, well, who are you? Who are you? And I was like, stuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's come up producing this podcast and building websites, because every time I have to describe myself, every About Tom page,
Yeah.
that's what I have the most difficulty with. Always.
Yeah.
Always. And I had this experience with someone who was a guest on the podcast a couple years ago, who does this thing. Her name's Melissa Morellis, and she does this series on Instagram where she kind of interviews people and does a Instagram post length bio with a photo of the person. And so I spent all this time on a Zoom call. She interviewed me and sent me all this stuff, and here's what I got. What do you think? And we kind of decided I was going to edit it and finish it, right? And so it gave me an opportunity to really, I mean, when you only have 2,200 characters to write your life story, you really got to focus. And so it really made me look at I talked to her for 2 hours. She took notes for 2 hours, sent them all to me, typed, and I'm looking through all this, and it really made me sort of sift through it all and distill it all down and say who I am, what I stand for, what makes me tick, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was so glad I did it. It just made me feel better.
Yeah.
And I think I would like to do a journaling challenge where maybe it starts like with a lot of detail about, you know, what was your childhood like? Who are the most important people in your life? You know, what's your relationship history like? Like let people write all kinds of stuff. And then as the month goes on, or whether it's 90 days or whatever, the culmination of it is to, okay, write a 3-paragraph long autobiography. See what you come up with.
Wow.
Because I really think that and if you listen to the intro of this podcast, one of the things I say is the guests have one thing in common. They're people who know who they are.
Yeah.
If I know who I am, you can't push me off of that. Right?
Yeah.
There's strength in that, in me knowing who I am. That's not to say there shouldn't be any flexibility or openness for feedback or whatever, but I think it says something about our society when you go to most people and you ask them who they are, they can't tell you who they are. I think that's a problem.
Yes. It reminds me of an assignment that I have given to women that I work with in recovery when they are kind of sorting through um, character defects and assets. I find that the asset portion is always the most difficult. And I guess that really plays into the, we're our own worst critic, and we can, write an entire page of things that we, find that we might want to change. But when we start talking about, what are my good qualities that I have, we struggle. So
Mm-hmm.
I ask them to talk to 5 people in their life, and suggestion is that it not be their spouse, that it not be a parent, that it not be a best friend, but it be some people that know them,
Mm-hmm.
and have them offer 5 qualities that they see in them. And that really is an exercise for them to see not what other people think about them, but be open to that maybe these things are true about me.
Yeah, and what I don't see.
Yes. And what ends up happening is usually 2, if not 3, maybe even 4 or 5 of the people that you have asked all identify the exact same qualities.
Right.
So it's kind of like, okay, you have all this evidence. Here you have 5 people that are saying that you are smart. You have 5 people that saying you are compassionate. It's time to accept that you are compassionate.
Mm. Well, and then that becomes something that you really sort of can take pride in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like for me, I'm kind.
Yes.
Kindness is important to me. I believe in people. I've learned over the years. And this came up for me. I really sort of affirmed this running transitional living facilities, because I'd have someone who, we generally, things were pretty tight. People didn't relapse that often. And when it did, it made a ripple. And my thing has always been, I'll give somebody a second chance, but not a third chance.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been times when, and usually something like that happens, I would engage the community and at least let them be heard, not necessarily have a voice in the decision, but what do you think? And I would but we trusted him, Tom. What if he just does this all over again and hurts us again? And, who's to say that he's going to stay sober? And my response was, what if he does? Like, I would rather be the guy who believes in someone than the guy who doesn't.
Right. Yep.
So I'm going to believe. And if I get burned, I get burned.
Yeah.
But, I'm not going to fault myself for it. I'm not going to second guess myself for it. I'm going to choose to believe in another human being. And, those were the kinds of things that came out in that exercise.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things that make me who I am as a human being.
Yeah. And I believe that if you do start this journaling challenge, things are going to present themselves to all of us who participate in the challenge to see who we are. I think that's just kind of like the, way of the universe, that's how things unfold.
Yeah. So that's a work in progress. But we'll definitely continue to talk about this Men Who Talk thing. Some of the stuff we've covered so far, toxic masculinity,
Mm-hmm.
What it is, what it isn't, at least in my mind. And I want to talk about male privilege, these are a lot of these things. They're like lightning rod statements that guys really take offense to you even introducing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The friend zone is another one that we've talked about a little bit, but haven't had an episode on, which to me is kind of a cop out for guys, you know, because if I'm really treating someone like another human being and I'm going into an interaction without this big agenda, like I need you to serve this purpose for me. If I'm treating you like another human being, then why should it make a difference whether you have feelings for me, you know, putting me in a friend zone, whatever, you know? I mean, it's just like, to me, it's guys forfeiting the responsibility for their own lives. And if I, yeah, anyway, that's something that I feel like would be good to talk about. Yeah. And
do you
just
ever get suggestions from people that listen to your podcast on things that they would like to hear about?
You know, the thing about suggestions is
Everybody's got one. Yeah.
no, it's people have to speak up and say, I ask for them, but I don't get them. I typically don't get them. And that's the kind of thing where I think maybe if I did an Instagram live or something like that, maybe it'd be more likely to come that way if I did it at a particular time. But what I was thinking is we'll get this thing rolling, and the first few episodes we'll kick around what should the series of topics be.
Yes.
And then we'll schedule a series of topics, maybe 8 of them.
Yeah, a little brainstorm sesh.
Yeah, and let people participate. And the thing about this is, and you know, people listening to this now may be asking, okay, so it's men who talk. Why are you talking to this woman about being on a... Well, because first of all, women have an interest in men, right? And although it's less true now than it was 5-10 years ago, I mean, as a guy who's gone to publishers wanting to write books for men and stuff like that, who's, you know, in this world, I mean, a lot of the feedback you get is, well, guys don't buy books like that. Guys don't really consume information like that. Not en masse. And so, a lot of times the way men do get introduced to stuff like this is through a woman who loves them, right?
Yeah.
So it's, you know, they get here through the back door or whatever. But so I think, and probably guys have come, there are a handful of guys who've come to it consistently, but there have been more women who have come consistently, and probably more guys listen to it on the replays.
Interesting.
But, you know, we all need to get the message. So, I mean, and the problems that exist with men, which to me, when I say that, what I think about first is our relationships with our emotions. Women are complicit in those problems. You know, they are. Women are complicit in misogyny. They are.
Yeah.
I mean, some less than others. But, you know, there's, you know, it's like the story Brene Brown talks about how, you know, the guy who comes to her after she does one of her talks about being vulnerable, and he tells her that, you know, I have 2 daughters and a wife over there that the last thing they want to see is for me to be vulnerable, to take off my mask. I can't do that with them. Yeah, it's all very interesting. I think the patriarchy, you know, I want to talk about, and, you know, one of the challenges for me in what I write and what I do with this kind of stuff is I don't want to use these words that just turn people off and turn them away. But we need to talk about it because to me, like the male privilege thing, the patriarchal thing, what it really amounts to is the deck is stacked to some degree. It always has been in favor of men. And that's changing a little bit over time, and we have to adapt to those changes and all that. But to me, the real problem is for men, it goes back to the authenticity thing. Because if you and I are up for a job interview and I get the job because I'm a man and I know you're better than me, how do I feel about myself? I'm going to kind of hate myself. I'm definitely not going to respect myself. And so that head start that happens all through our lives in so many different ways, I think undermines us as men. Because if we let the situation play out fairly and you got the job because you deserved the job, then I would be challenged to become better. But instead, we just give Tom the job because Tom's the guy, because that's what we do. You know, it's not fair. It's not fair. And it doesn't help. It doesn't help. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I do think it would be interesting to see if other men have the same emotion about that. Do they stop to think about it from that perspective, or do they just kind of rejoice in that they got hired for a job?
Well, and if they,
are they making space for that emotion?
well, or does their belief system even allow room for that?
Right.
Because if they believe they deserve it because they're a man, why should they feel bad? Right?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I think there are men really on all ends of the spectrum, because there may be the man that does not think that way, but once it's posed to him that, hey, here's this, scenario. How do you feel about that? It may be very, eye-opening.
Yeah.
For some people as well.
Yeah.
I think that you made a good point earlier when you talked about all the work that you've done on yourself, because I don't know that anyone, and this is not man, woman, and I shouldn't say anyone. I don't know that the majority of people are as capable of allowing the space for a thought like that. Does that make sense? You're very kind and you're very cognizant of your place in the world. And I don't know that everybody has made time for thoughts like that.
I think you're right. And I think one of the things that I have to constantly remember is that not everybody gives a shit. A lot of people just want to go to work and have their lunch and come home. They don't want to think about this stuff, let alone talk about it.
Again, there are people, I think they're like, I don't give a shit about that. Or there are people that is literally never a thought that entered their mind, because they were so, just hyper focused on, I have to get this job because I have, X, Y, and Z going on at home and I haven't been employed for 6 months.
Right.
They can't think about things like that because the priority is getting the job.
Well, that's where it gets political too, because, really going deep into all this stuff. One of the I think I told you in one of our other conversations that I'm finding myself writing a lot of these one-liners. And one of them was that, only in a society like ours can this kind of dysfunction exist, where kids are getting shot at school and we're not doing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
We're numb to it. To it. And, everybody's busy.
Mm-hmm.
Gotta survive, man. We don't have time to feel. We gotta work.
Mm-hmm.
And then you turn on the news I mean, it is when you really like, if you detox from all the cable news shows and just turn on the PBS NewsHour, it's the only real news that exists in this country anymore, really.
Yeah.
Where they just tell the news. It's like when you just do that, it's like the intensity that we're surrounded with. It's like, how can our brains function normally?
Well, yeah, they can't.
Then you get into healthcare, like it is not a healthcare system. You know, I mean, really, it's not. Like
Right.
we can't afford to take care of our health. Our diets are terrible. Yeah, I mean, we're constantly distracted.
Yeah.
You know, pornography addiction, now gambling addiction. I guarantee you in the next few years, we're going to be seeing more and more gambling addiction with all these sports book things popping up everywhere. And we haven't even talked about substance abuse.
Right. Well, you know, you mentioned the news, and I have some experience with that, you know, of historically being a bit of a news junkie. And like I went on vacation one time and went to a news museum.
Okay.
Washington, D.C. used to have a news museum.
Yeah.
So I was a bit of a news junkie. And when the pandemic hit and all of the racial tensions flared, George Floyd was murdered, just everything on the news was just too much for me. It was a lot. And I have not historically had anxiety, but I didn't really recognize what was going on with me, but I was just so on edge all of the time. And one day I just made a decision. I cannot do this anymore. I listen to talk radio in the car. I watch the news all the time, and I just made a decision to end it. And essentially, I don't know what's going on half the time.
Yeah.
I mean, my husband has to tell me, you know, he'll say, I know you don't watch the news anymore, but did you know what's going on in Ukraine? Or I know you don't watch the news anymore, but did you hear about this? And my answer is always no, because I just can't do it. I had to make that decision for my mental health. It was really, really too much.
Yeah. You know, I had a similar experience, and I studied journalism in high school. Worked for a couple newspapers in my adult life, you know, so like I feel like, I don't know, I feel a little uncomfortable calling myself a journalist, but at my core, I'm trained as a journalist, you know, like I know how to sniff out what's news and what's not.
Right.
I mean, I know the difference between news and editorializing, which is essentially all we get. Editorializing.
Yeah.
You know, so, but I went through something very similar during COVID, but I've made some exceptions with myself with, the previous presidency because one, I've been super concerned.
Yes.
Two, I also love history and I want to witness it, you know? I mean, one impeachment is history, right? We got
Absolutely.
to see two of them, right? Yeah. And then now these indictments and stuff, like,
yeah.
Oh my God, it's insane. But also, and the news stuff is crazy. And, you know, the reason it's this way, and I've done episodes about this that you may or may not have listened to, but the reason it's this way is because one side of the aisle deregulated the media. There was a fairness doctrine. So they deregulated the media, and then they started a network talking about the liberal media.
Mm-hmm.
And now for 30 years, they've been pounding this stuff into our heads. They co-signed a war or two. You know, I mean, it's crazy the propaganda that we have been. So it's no wonder all this stuff has happened. But the hope, if you look at history, before they regulated the media, they had to regulate the media. Because there was a lot of sensationalism and all the stuff that we see happening now because of these, essentially, corporations own the news outlets.
Yes.
So what they want is for people to watch. They're not concerned about informing people. They're concerned about making money. That's it. So I don't know how we come out of this. I don't know what it looks like in 20 years, but I do have hope that it can be better. And I do have, I don't want to see anybody go to jail or, I don't wish that kind of stuff on anybody, but I am encouraged that the rule of law seems to be holding up.
Yes.
Seems to be at this point.
Yes.
So, because that's really what this is all built on, right? That's really what matters more than anything else. So anyway.
It's interesting too that you mentioned jail. So I had another thought before we went down this road, when we were talking about perspectives and, why people may or may not think about things that, you or I think about, what's going on with them situationally that, doesn't even allow for them to have these thoughts. I was having a conversation with a young man that I met recently who spent 10 years in federal prison. And he got out of prison 4 days before the lockdown for COVID.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, everyone, and he recently got sober and he just celebrated 90 days sober. He said, when I first got into recovery, that he heard everyone talking about how much COVID had changed everything, how much COVID had changed recovery and meetings and just, life in general. And he said, I didn't have that experience. I went from a place that was truly in lockdown to freedom.
Right.
So it was just so interesting to hear his perspective, It
might have benefited him to be not quite as free,
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have a really hard time with that transition back into the world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I could go on with you forever, but we probably ought to shut this thing down. So I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody.
Okay.
If you could go back to the younger Ashley when she was having a particularly hard time, maybe the worst time in your life, when would that have been and what would you go back and say to her or do for her?
Oh, wow. Gosh, it's like I knew you were going to ask me this, but
you can't be prepared for it, can you?
You really can't. I have not always been such an inquisitive person. And I think it might have benefited me a bit to be more inquisitive as a child. So I might say to myself, ask questions. Ask questions. I have found that understanding things give me comfort. And I definitely, had some times as a child where I was in need of comfort. So, asking questions, no matter how hard they are.
I love that.
Thank you.
You know what else I love about it is that you've listened to this show a lot. Nobody's ever given me an answer like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
People say, you ask a lot of questions, don't you? Yes, because I want to understand.
Yeah.
I want to understand.
Yeah. It's a good trait to have. Thanks for listening to the show. Please subscribe, leave a rating or a review. at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can learn more about my other podcasts by visiting thepathtooauthenticity.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. Music is by the band Punk Rock Opera, used under a Creative Commons license and with permission from the artist. The show is produced by me, Tom Gentry. You can find more of my work on Substack, including a podcast only available to paid subscribers. So again, thanks for listening. Keep coming back. Be nice.
You did great, honey.